Welcome to the GAB by the Independent Press Award. I'm your hostess, Gabby Olczak. Today, we welcome award-winning author James Ross of Jackson, Wyoming. Jim's debut mystery novel, Coldwater Revenge, was recently awarded the 2022 Independent Press Award. In addition to a multitude of awards, his debut historical fiction novel, Hunting Teddy Roosevelt, received the 2021 Independent Press Award Distinguished Favorite. A novelist and gifted storyteller, Jim has also been a Peace Corps volunteer in the Congo, a CBS News producer, and a congressional staffer, and a Wall Street lawyer. Jim, welcome to the GAB and congratulations.
Well, thank you, Gab. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. So Jim, you were quoted as saying, "I wrote my first book in college and published the first one the same year I started to collect Social Security." I love that quote. Of course, that book was Hunting Teddy Roosevelt. Seems like you've lived many, many lives in between. Share with us how these various stages in life prepared you to be a better writer.
Well, there's a Chinese saying, or curse, depending on how you look at it, may you live in interesting times. I think for my generation, going to college during the Vietnam War, and that period was, a pretty exciting introduction to adult life. It was a period of constant change. When I look back at it, I feel a certain degree of compassion for the parents of my generation who were, depression babies. The ones who the men went off and fought World War II. The ones who survived, came back and started families early. Life was good for a while, and then all hell broke loose in terms of difference in generations, the Vietnam War, and so on and so forth. Things haven't stopped changing dramatically since then. I think I'm the beneficiary or the recipient of that Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times.
Well, you certainly did live and are living an interesting life. So, Jim, after publishing Hunting Teddy Roosevelt, a historical fiction novel, what led you to delve into the mystery thriller genre with Coldwater Revenge? And might I add, in addition to all of the awards that you've won for it, it's number 15 on the Amazon mystery bestseller chart. No easy feat. So what made you decide to delve into that genre?
Well, actually, I wrote that book before I wrote Hunting Teddy Roosevelt. I had actually a meeting with my then agent at his office to sign a contract for that book right at the time of the 2008 crash. And when I showed up to sign the contract for it, the publisher backed out. And at that point, he sat me down and said, "Look, the market is in disarray. If you were a Kennedy or a New York ball player, we could probably make this deal go through, but ain't going to happen. So in the meantime, let's think about your next book." And we started kicking around ideas, and Hunting Teddy Roosevelt came out of that. Actually Coldwater Revenge was written, before Hunting Teddy Roosevelt, although it sold 10 years later. And as you know, that's publishing.
Yes, it certainly is. Now, which book did you enjoy writing more and why?
I enjoyed writing Coldwater Revenge more because it's basically, a thinly disguised autobiography. So I got to revisit the town and people of my youth, in certain respects, settle some old scores. And also, I think the themes in the book are, deeper and richer. The Hunting Teddy Roosevelt, he's a larger than life character. He takes over the story. It's it's action adventure. And while I, had a gas writing it, Coldwater Revenge and the Coldwater Mystery series, for that matter, have, in my view, more depth to them.
You seem to draw an awful lot from your real life experiences, especially, as you said, with Coldwater Revenge. Sounds like you had a really idyllic childhood growing up in a small farming community near a lake. And in fact, one of your protagonists, Tom, in Coldwater Revenge, is influenced by Father Goss.
Yes.
And I understand the real Father Goss recently passed away. And you were quoted as saying that he helped both you and Tom rise above your raising. What did you mean by that?
I grew up in a fairly typical small town, church-centric, Irish ethnic community. While that's very protective and it's a safe place to grow up, it's not the real world, and its values tend to be very conservative. If you happen to be different at all from the group, if you're smarter or you're this, that, or the other thing, the tall poppy syndrome will kick in. You'll get cut back to average and to fit. And for some people, that simply doesn't work. And I was fortunate enough to, in the Father Gauss character, encounter a real intellectual, which were rare in my little town at that time. He sort of took me under his wing and introduced me to a larger world. I realized that there was, life beyond Coldwater, with possibilities that more suited who I am. So, like the Tom character, I left and made my my way in the larger world, as opposed to staying in the community I grew up in.
Which of the two brothers, Jim, do you connect with more, Tom or Joe?
Tom, for probably obvious reasons, but Joe reflects the upbringing I had. The tough, stoic, don't tread on me, macho prototype of the 1950s and 60s. There's a part of him that I retain and cherish, but he's a small part.
Now, I'm curious, was it your calling to become a storyteller and writer? Because I understand there's a tradition of storytelling in your family. And in fact, your son is also a writer.
Yes. I would say it wasn't an intention. It's more, if you've been blessed or cursed with any kind of ability, whether it's athleticism, visual arts, writing, painting, or whatever, you need to give it expression or it'll bug the bejesus out of you. We don't choose. We just at a certain point discover that there's this itch we have to scratch. There's really no choice for many of us.
So it sounds like it was a calling, and I enjoyed many of your stories. And one of the stories you told was about your son when he was younger. You said he really didn't read a lot. He wasn't, and you as a writer, I'm sure that was a little disheartening for you. So now that he's a writer, what advice do you have for your son and also for aspiring authors?
The most helpful advice I can think of is don't count on making a living at it. This is an art. Do your best. That's where you'll get the satisfaction. If you're a storyteller, you're going to have to tell stories. If you keep doing it, you'll reach a level of proficiency where people will enjoy listening to you. That is its own reward. And for all but a very few, it's its own and only reward. The arts are tough. I would say to any aspiring writer, enjoy this gift, but have a plan B.
Well, it sounds like you had many plan Bs, Jim, throughout your life. So book 2 in the series, Coldwater Confession, was recently published. Two questions there. Tell us the difference between Coldwater Confession and Revenge, and why did you do a series?
I did a series because I signed a contract to do a series, is the honest answer. The publisher who bought Coldwater Revenge said, love the book, we want 3 of them. It's like, okay.
Well, that's flattering.
Yeah. Well, I already had book number 2 in the trunk, so it was really a commitment to come up with a third, as is the case in publishing. There are many hands took a turn improving Coldwater Revenge when it first came out, so that the book I had in the trunk is book number 2, Coldwater Confession, needed to be conformed to all the changes in book number 1. Just to throw out an example, the original Coldwater Revenge, both brothers were bachelors. The story unfolded from there. And at the suggestion of my then agent, we gave Joe a family. So Tom, his brother, didn't seem so much a cold, remote Wall Street jerk. Instead, he was the beloved uncle, and you could see his softer side. Things like that. The basic blocking and tackling, making a series coherent if you make fundamental changes to the beginning, as I did. But that's really how the 3-book series came about, a contract. The concept was much simpler than that. When my sons, who were close in age, were about to enter high school, their mother said to me, "My worst fear is that they fall for the same girl." And bingo, that was the series right there.
I love it. And it must have been really satisfying, as you said, because it is really semi-autobiographical, which is really fun as an author to write. So do you have any other, I'm sure book 3 is either in the trunk or already written. Do you have any other books in the trunk that you're thinking about, or?
Yes, actually.
Any ideas?
I'm working on the 3rd book in the series now, but the one I hope to write after this is based on the moth story that's up on my website. The story of, I don't know if you've seen it, but I did a live storytelling for the Moth, I guess it's called the Moth Radio Hour. When they were touring the West, they invited some local storytellers, myself included, to join them. So we did a evening at a local concert hall where I told a story about getting my then girlfriend, later wife, and my son's mother out of the Congo in the midst of a invasion of the country by Cuban and Angolan rebels. It was kind of a hair-raising adventure. Story went over well, and it's a book that it's a story I'd like to turn into a book next. My only hesitation is whether it's a story that's long enough to be a novel. So if any of your readers happen to visit my website and want to play that performance, I'd love feedback on that.
Well, I have actually listened to quite a few of your stories, and I think it's fair to say, Jim, you can also add comedian to your resume, without a doubt. Tell us about your newsletter, because I think our readers would be very interested in listening to some of your stories.
Well, trying to get an audience for your stories is, marketing and sales as opposed to art. So I'm actually learning as I go along. It's been recommended to me by my publisher and others that I have a newsletter, I have a website, I have a Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, etc. As a former lawyer and businessman, I'm reminded of what John Wanamaker, the founder of the first department store, said about advertising. He said something to the effect that 50% of advertising is wasted. We know that. We just don't know which 50%. So the newsletter is part of an effort to just make people aware of Jim Ross, storyteller. Listen up if you like it, listen more. But whether it's an effective marketing and sales tool, I don't really know.
Well, let's try to help you out. How can readers learn more about you?
I think the best place is to go to my website, jamesrossauthor.com. There you can there are links to all my books. There are links to live performances. There are links to published stories. There's quite a bit of material on there. And hopefully whoever lands on that page is so fascinated that it takes them at least an hour or two before they leave.
Well, I think there's a pretty good chance of that, for sure. So one final question, Jim. During the pandemic, you were asked who you would want to meet or hang out with. And you replied, myself at age 20, so I can give me a heads up about the road ahead. So Jim, what would you say to your younger self?
I would say get rid of your vices earlier than you did. Work on your strengths harder. Enjoy the ride.
Great advice. Jim, thank you so much for joining us today. This is Gabby Olczak of the GAB. Join us next week when we talk with Stephen Fish, author of A Call to Reform. Until next time, keep reading.